All right, so we've added these layers in here, and now we need to get in here and try to make this look a little bit better. So like I talked about, whenever you add a layer to down here to your timeline, every layer is going to contain some sort of properties to it. So if you're adding effects to it, it's going to contain those effects properties. If you have a shape layer, it's going to contain these stroke properties and all kinds of stuff. And really any layer is going to have some transform properties. So let's talk about those. And this is where you're going to get into changing the size and scale and rotation and things like that for your layer. So we're going to focus on our big texture that we added. And what we want to do is scale it down. We want to rotate it a little bit and move it into place to where we want it. Right now it's very big and we don't need it to be this big. It's going to start getting a little pixelated. So we want to stretch that down or scale it down and get a little smaller. So you can see when I zoom out here, and you can do that. I'm just using the little button on my mouse to scroll back and forth, or you can change it over here in the this zoom drop down menu. So you can see that I have this really big bounding box around that texture, and it's just way too big for my composition. So I want to scale it down, and big layers are good to have so that you can scale up and scale down to keep your quality high. But right now we just want to scale this down to fit. So the way to do that is I'm going to go down here to my timeline, and I'm going to click on that layer, and over to the left hand side you'll see this little arrow pointing to the right. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to drop down this little menu. And so based on whatever you have on this layer, it's going to show down here. So you may have some effects or something, but pretty much everything will have this transform option. I'm going to toggle this one down as well, and it's going to show a bunch of different options. So to explain these, let me go through those a little bit. So we have anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. So the anchor point is really where everything happens from. So you have this little crosshair here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this small little crosshair. So if I scale it down, it's going to scale from that point. If I rotate it, it's going to rotate from that point. So for right now, we're just going to keep it right in the center, and I can hit, I can go down to scale, and I can click and drag where this 100% is. I can just click and drag that down and scale it way down. So we'll just scale it down a little bit, and then we can also rotate it. So I can go down to rotation and click and drag this right here and rotate it this way. What I would recommend you do is, I'm going to undo that a little bit, is get used to using keyboard shortcuts, and that are going to save you a ton of time. And so for instance, if I was on this layer and I wanted to, if I didn't have to toggle all those menus down and I just wanted to adjust the scale, I'm going to hit S on the keyboard, and that's going to just bring up that scale property. So then I can click and drag and scale that down. Same thing goes for position, I believe is P, and I can move those around, or you can adjust those numbers down here. So you have your x-axis and you have your y-axis. We have opacity would be T on the keyboard, so I can drop that opacity down like that. I'll keep that at 100 for now. And rotation, as you would think would be R, is actually W. So to adjust your rotation, you hit W on the keyboard, and then you get your, you can tell my little tool has changed to a rotation option, so that I can just click and drag and it rotates. So if I do want to rotate it, I want to rotate it to where it kind of fits the actual size of the screen. Problem is I can't get it just right on that 90-degree turn, so it'd be a little difficult. So to save some time and to speed up the process is to hold down Shift, and it will rotate pretty much every 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to rotate that right there, and it locks it in perfectly to 90 degrees. And then I want to scale it down, so I'm going to hit S on the keyboard, and then I can come down here and scale this down there. And if I want to move it around, I can really just hit V on the keyboard for that selection tool, and then I can move it into place like that. So really, again, everything is going to have those properties. So these solids are going to have those transform tools. All sorts of things are going to have them. Now you're going to run into a couple of layers that will have some different options in there, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but I'll just show you really quickly is that your text layer and your shape layer will have a few extra things. So I'm going to go to the text layer. I'm going to toggle this down, and you have the transform option, you have text, and there's not a ton we can do here. We'll get into this in a little bit, but with your shape layers and your text layers is you have this option right over here, and this is an animate. And so if you click on this little play button or arrow, you'll have a bunch of different options that you can go in and animate. And so we'll mess with this in a little bit, but for now, I just wanted to let you know that this is where a lot of things will be happening as far as some animation stuff that we'll get into in a bit. So let's clean this up to make this look a little bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my text to all caps. I'm going to click on that text layer, can click on it just by selecting it right there, and I can go over to this option and I can hit all caps. If I don't want to keep this button turned off, I can click on that and I can just come up here and double click on my text layer, and then now I can edit it. So I can just hold down the caps lock key and do all caps like that, and I can click off of that, as well as now since that layer is selected, I can go and change the color. We'll keep it pretty much white for now, maybe just a slight off white, and I'm just changing this color by selecting this button over here. Now if I was to select it over here, this, the character panel stay here, but if I don't have a text layer selected, this isn't going to do anything. So if I try to change the color, it's not going to do anything. So I have to tell it what layer I want to change. And this character panel, again, only affects the color of the character, not actual other layers. So this is just for your text. Okay, so this looks pretty good. I'm going to scale this down a little bit, and we will maybe stretch out that kerning a little bit on that. Okay, that's fine like that. And I want to also make sure this is in the center of my composition. So I'm going to go back to that little button down here and go to Title Action Safe. And you can see that I'm not quite in the center. So I'm just going to drag and try to line that up right there in the center. Okay, that looks pretty good. I might select a different font. Let's see. Let's do something like that. Who knows? We'll actually do our font. Okay, so now we've adjusted our font, so let's go and mess with our shape layer. So I'm going to click on shape layer, and again, you can go and edit all of this stuff. So we'll go to, we'll just make this maybe a dark blue. We'll make our fill color something maybe like a lighter blue. Hit OK. All right, and then our background layer is just fine like that. We'll leave that for now. So a couple things we can do as far as our layers go is we can get into some effects and even some blending modes. So if I wanted to take my background and maybe blend it with this blue background, as I would do all that, it's a lot like Photoshop. As you go to your blending modes, so like overlay and add and screen and things like that. And the way to find those is down here you'll have this button right here, toggle switches and modes. I can click on this and it's going to show me my different blending modes. So I can click on my texture layer and maybe go to a multiply or something like that. And now it's blending it with that blue background. That looks fine. It's not the coolest looking thing ever, but it's fine for now. And you can cycle through these quickly. If you click on that layer and you do Shift plus and minus, it will cycle through those different blending modes so you can find something that really works for whatever you're creating. I'm just doing, again, Shift and the plus key to cycle through those. So one thing that I don't really love is how this grunginess on here is brown. So what I would need to do is maybe add an effect to this to drop the saturation of it a little bit. So the way to do that is just like we did with our adjustment layer. So if you want to add effects, you don't have to always add it to adjustment layers. You can add it to any layer you want. So I'm just going to go to my paper layer, and with this selected, I'm going to go up to effect, and I'm going to go over here and go through these menus. So I'm going to focus on the color correction for now. So we're going to go over here and I'm going to go down to Hue and Saturation. And you can see that there's just tons and tons of things to play with. I use Hue and Saturation a lot. I use selective color a lot, levels and curves. So for now, we're just going to go to Hue and Saturation. I'm going to click on that and it's going to add it to that layer. So again, with this effects controls panel pulled off to the side, I can quickly see which layer has an effects on it and which one doesn't. This one does, so I'm going to go to the master saturation and just pretty much just drop that down to nearly 0. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to go back to my shape layer and just change that color maybe to like a dark, something like that. Nothing too fancy here. So you can see you can add effects to that, and there's so many different effects you can go through. So I'm going to go up to the effects controls and we'll just go through a couple of these here. So there's some audio stuff you can add if you have some sound in here. We could add a blur and sharpen. So there's a bunch of different blurs you can use, and we won't get into all those, but if I just added a fast box blur, I can then stretch this out, and you can see that it's blurring that background. You see my little spots here are getting very, very blurry. I don't really need to do that, but that's how you would mess around with the blur. And again, you can start stacking all of these effects onto your layer if you want. So there's blur and sharpen. Don't really need to mess with Mocha right in the moment, or Cinema 4D. So we're just going to focus on a few of the ones that you would really mess around with. So again, color correction, again, you can go into all of these and click and add them and see what they would do. So if I wanted to add a levels, I could start clicking on some of these and moving them around and really pulling in some different levels of blacks and whites in this image here. So many different effects you can do with the color correction, and this really plays a big role if you have an image that has a lot of color to it. or something like that. Maybe even footage as well. Distortion has a lot of fun things that you can do that we won't really go into at the moment, but I recommend getting in there and just playing around with some things. And even if you want to get into this, I would just go and Google, using turbulent displace or using a displacement map or warps and things like that. So without spending forever going through these, you can quickly just Google what these things are. And I'm sure you'll get a ton of videos that will show you what to do and how to mess around with them. But it will easily just they're just distorting your so if I were to bump this up, you can see it's like distorting my image all back there. So there's just tons of ways to mess around with distortion. Let's see what else we have. Expression controls we won't go into in these videos. You can add various things with the generate option, so you can do like a gradient, or you can do just an overall fill on the entire layer, so you can change your color of the layer. Just completely adds a full color on there. Let's see what else we have. If you're doing a green screen, you would throw on a key light option to cut out green screen. Some various matte chokers, which we want. Again, we're not going to get into too much of this. If you want to add some noise to your image, you could do that as well. And again, this is where you would see third-party plugins if you're using. So I use a different motion blur for 3D images, or you can do a particle generator, which is with Trapcode. Some lens flares from Video Copilot. So again, tons of stuff to play in here. We won't go into it yet, but that's how you would add these effects to your layers. You could add it to the actual layer. You could add it to an adjustment layer, or shape layers as well. So whatever you add it to, you can affect that actual layer. So a good example of adding effects to those adjustment layers, if I wanted to keep my black and white, but maybe I wanted to add another layer, so I can do layer, new, and adjustment layer. And let's say I wanted to do a full blur on the entire project. So I'm just going to put this up here at the top. We can delete this controller for now. We're not using that yet. And I wanted to add a effect to this. I would do blur and sharpen, and we'll just throw a fast box blur on there. So if I increase this, it's going to blur my entire image. So this would be a cool way to animate a blur onto your image as well. So without going too much farther, we're going to stop it here. In the next video, we'll go through how to keyframe and animate some of these effects layers, and even some of our layers and the positions and things like that. So that's going to be a little bit more of a lengthy video. So I wanted to stop here, and before we get into that, so you can easily follow along in the next one. Thanks a lot.